You're not lazy. You're burned out. You think you're tired because you haven't done enough, that maybe if you just pushed harder, woke up earlier, stayed more focused, you wouldn't feel so behind. But the truth is darker and simpler. You're not tired from doing too little. You're tired from carrying too much, and not just work or tasks or deadlines. You've been carrying the pressure to prove yourself, to hide your exhaustion, to pretend you're fine, even when your soul is aching for stillness. You've been holding yourself together not with peace but with tension, like a bow stretched too long. Losing its strength with each day you force yourself to smile through. This isn't about discipline. This is about distortion. Somewhere along the way you were taught that being tired was weakness, that stopping meant failure, that your worth depended on your output, and so, like many others, you learned to equate stillness with laziness. But this is the first illusion. What you call lazy is often the last cry of a mind pushed beyond its limit, a mind begging to feel safe enough to slow down. You don't even rest when you rest. Your body might stop moving, but your mind doesn't. It keeps spinning, calculating, comparing, planning, punishing. You close your eyes and the weight follows you. Because rest without permission is not rest. It's paralysis. You're not choosing peace. You're collapsing into it, not because you want to, but because you have no energy left to resist. And then, as if that wasn't enough, you scold yourself for not being stronger. This is the quiet cruelty of burnout. It doesn't arrive loudly. It creeps in. It starts as hesitation, as fog, as moments of confusion where you used to have clarity. Then it grows into guilt, into numbness, into that strange feeling where even joy feels like a task, where even free time feels wasted. And you ask yourself, why can't I enjoy anything anymore? Why does everything feel heavy, even the things I used to love? It's because your nervous system has been stretched too far for too long, because the fire you used to run on is now smoke. You were never meant to be this alert, this stimulated, this exposed to so much pressure and noise all the time. And yet here you are, pretending that this is normal, pretending that waking up tired and going to bed numb is just a part of life. It's not. It's a warning, and you've been ignoring it. Not because you're foolish, but because you thought ignoring it was strength. Even now, part of you might resist this message. It might say, no, I'm just undisciplined. I'm not working hard enough. I'm not motivated enough. But I need you to pause, and I need you to listen with your entire being. You are not lazy. What you are is wounded. And that wound is deeper than you think. It's the wound of being overexposed to urgency, to pressure, to judgment, to impossible expectations. It's the wound of living in a world that confuses speed with success, that values performance over presence, that tells you rest is earned instead of essential. You are not broken. You are responding exactly as any living organism would under chronic strain. You shut down, you resist, you withdraw. That is not failure, that is survival. But survival is not the end. You don't just want to survive. You want to feel again. You want clarity again. You want to wake up and not dread the day before it even begins. You want to remember what it feels like to breathe without guilt, to pause without panic, to be still and not feel worthless. That doesn't begin with another goal, or another routine, or another motivational video that tells you to hustle harder. It begins with truth. The truth that your tiredness is valid, that your disconnection is not a flaw, that you've been trying to pour from a well that's been dry for a long time. You don't need to be shamed into effort. You need to be seen, to be understood, to be reminded that this fatigue is not a reflection of who you are, but of how long you've had to pretend to be someone you're not. You're not lazy, you're burned out. And the moment you accept this, the moment you stop blaming yourself for what was never your fault, is the moment you begin to heal. Healing doesn't begin with force. It begins with honesty. And that honesty is the door you've been too afraid to knock on, until now. The myth of laziness, a lie sold by a burnout culture. There is a lie that has been repeated so many times, you've started to believe it's your own voice. It whispers that your problem is laziness, that if you just cared more, tried harder, stopped being so distracted, you'd be fine. And yet, you've tried, you've pushed, you've stayed up late and woken up early. You've written to-do lists, watched motivational speeches, scrolled through productivity hacks, and still, the heaviness remains. Still, the simplest things feel like they weigh 100 pounds. If laziness were the issue, you would have fixed this by now. So maybe it's time to consider that laziness is not your flaw, but a label used to shame your suffering. We live in a world obsessed with output. Your value is measured by how much you produce, how fast you respond, how well you compete. We reward constant motion. We celebrate exhaustion like it's a badge of honor. And when someone slows down, not to rest, but because their soul is drowning, we call them weak, lazy, unmotivated. But what if that person isn't lazy at all? What if that person is wounded, misdiagnosed? What if what we call laziness is actually emotional fatigue dressed in silence? You've been trained to keep moving, to override your internal signals, to ignore pain if it gets in the way of performance. So when your body resists, when your mind stalls, you assume it's your fault. You don't question the system and you question yourself. You don't wonder if your exhaustion is valid. You punish yourself for not rising above it. You think strength means never slowing down. But the Stoics knew better. They taught that the soul must be tended with the same care as the body, that effort without wisdom is reckless, that pushing without purpose is not discipline, it's self-abandonment. Laziness implies a lack of will. But look closer. You're still trying, even in the fog. You're still searching for answers. You're still here, listening to this, because part of you refuses to give up. That's not laziness. That's endurance. A quieter kind. A hidden kind. One that doesn't look heroic from the outside, but is deeply noble on the inside. To keep going while feeling broken. That is not a flaw. That is not failure. That is evidence of your strength. You don't owe the world constant productivity. You don't have to earn your right to rest by breaking yourself first. Your worth is not a scoreboard. And yet, somewhere inside, you still feel like you're falling behind. Because the system was designed that way. It rewards the ones who keep going until they collapse. It applauds the ones who smile while unraveling. It says, rise and grind, while your body screams to lie down and breathe. But you're not a cog in a machine. You're a human being, a soul carrying layers of pressure, grief, expectation, comparison, and unspoken fear. And when all of that gets too loud, your body tries to slow you down. It's not sabotaging you, it's protecting you. When you can't get out of bed, when you can't start that project, when you stare at a wall for 20 minutes instead of writing that email, that's not laziness. That's your system hitting the brakes before it crashes completely. But because we don't speak this language of burnout, you misinterpret the signals. You call it failure, you call it defeat. And worst of all, you call it who you are. You are not your output. You are not your inbox. You are not the number of things you check off a list. And you are certainly not the story that says, if I'm not constantly achieving, I have no value. That story was planted in you. It's not your voice. You were born with a rhythm far more natural than this chaos. A rhythm that includes stillness, that includes pause, that includes the quiet moments where nothing gets done but healing begins. Burnout is not always loud, it's not always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like nothing at all, like sitting on the couch, like losing track of time, like forgetting what you were about to say. And in that silence, judgment rushes in. But the truth is, those moments are not empty. They are your body trying to reset, your soul trying to breathe. And if you shame yourself in those moments, you cut off the very oxygen you need to survive. So no, you're not lazy. You're tired of pretending, tired of performing, tired of measuring your life by a ruler that was never meant to fit a human heart. And when you finally see that, something shifts. You stop trying to force yourself into the mold. You stop apologizing for feeling, and you start listening. Deeply, honestly, gently. Because the answer is not to push through. It's to break the cycle. Not by doing more, but by choosing to feel again. The quiet symptoms no one talks about. Not all wounds bleed. Some just echo in silence. That's what makes burnout so deceptive. It doesn't always scream, it whispers. It hides behind behaviors that seem ordinary. You don't collapse, you just slowly stop caring, you stop dreaming, you stop feeling, and the world doesn't notice. Because from the outside, you still function. You still answer messages. You still show up. You still smile when expected. But something essential inside you is slipping away. You begin to lose interest in what once lit you up. The books stay closed. The music sounds distant. The conversations feel flat. You look at things that once made your heart stir, and they now feel like faded photographs, familiar but disconnected from who you've become. And instead of asking why, you blame yourself. You call yourself ungrateful. You tell yourself to get it together. But how can you feel joy when your nervous system is frozen in self-preservation? There's a numbness that takes root. It doesn't feel like pain. It feels like nothing, like waking up and already wanting to go back to sleep, like walking through your own life as if it belongs to someone else. You're not falling apart in some dramatic breakdown. You're dissolving, piece by piece, while still replying to emails and pretending you're okay. You start avoiding simple tasks, not out of defiance, out of overwhelm. Even small decisions feel like cliffs. You hesitate before brushing your teeth, opening a message, stepping outside. You scroll not because you're interested, but because it's the only thing that doesn't ask anything of you. You delay responsibilities not out of laziness, but because your mind feels like a tangled thread you don't know how to unwind. And then comes the guilt. The endless guilt. Guilt for not being more productive. Guilt for resting. Guilt for canceling plans. Guilt for saying yes. Guilt for saying no. You are trapped in a paradox and everything feels wrong and everything is your fault. But that's not the truth. That's the voice of burnout. And it speaks in guilt because guilt keeps you quiet. Even when you rest, you don't feel rested. You lie in bed and your thoughts spiral. You try to relax but feel tense. You turn off the lights, but the pressure stays on. Because you're not tired from a long day, you're tired from a long year, a long decade, a long stretch of pretending that being everything to everyone wouldn't cost you yourself. There are days you can't remember what you did. You lose hours without realizing it. Time becomes a blur. And when you try to anchor yourself in something, you can't feel the ground. That's not failure. That's a mind that's disconnected from presence because it's trying to protect you from pain. Dissociation is not weakness. It's your brain's last attempt at shelter. You might find yourself becoming irritable, not because people did anything wrong, but because your bandwidth is gone. Every little request feels invasive. Every small noise feels sharp. You feel like you're being stretched thinner and thinner and no one sees it. And the more you withdraw, the more isolated you feel. But how do you ask for help when you're not even sure what's wrong? That's the cruelty of this condition. It's not clear. It's not obvious. You don't wake up one day and say, I've burned out. You just fade, like a light dimming slowly over time, until one day you can barely see your own reflection. You start to believe this is who you are now, that you've always been this dull, this tired, this blank. But that's not your identity, that's your exhaustion talking. That's a nervous system that's been running on fumes, trying to keep up with a life that's outpaced your humanity. You may start fantasizing about escape, about quitting everything, about disappearing. Not because you don't care, but because caring hurts, because the weight of showing up with a smile while feeling empty inside becomes unbearable. And still, you stay, you survive. You move through each day with invisible armor, but even armor gets heavy when worn too long. You've convinced yourself that no one would understand, that others have it worse, that asking for space is selfish. But those are lies burnout uses to keep you quiet. The truth is you don't need to justify your pain. You don't need to compare your suffering to someone else's. You don't need to bleed visibly to deserve care. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to feel heavy. You are allowed to not be okay, and you are allowed to say, this isn't laziness, this is something deeper, and I refuse to ignore it anymore. The burnout identity crisis. When you forget who you were. Burnout doesn't just steal your energy, it steals your reflection. You start forgetting who you were before the weight set in. You try to remember what made you feel alive, but the images come back blurry. You try to recall what ambition felt like. Not the external performance of it, but the real fire, and it feels foreign. You remember being more vibrant, more hopeful, more connected. But it's like trying to grab smoke. You can sense it but not hold it. That's the part no one warns you about. That burnout doesn't just make you tired, it makes you unrecognizable to yourself. Your thoughts change, your tone changes, the way you move through the world dulls, and you begin to craft a new identity, not from desire but from depletion. You start believing you've always been this way, low energy, low passion, low drive. And because it's gradual, you don't notice the shift. Until one day you wake up and realize you don't know who's looking back at you in the mirror. You used to dream. Even when life was hard, you had visions of something greater. You imagined creating, building, growing. Now, the future feels blank. Not scary, just absent. Like the horizon has disappeared and you stopped walking not because you gave up, but because there's nothing left to walk toward. That's not laziness. That's identity erosion. It happens when your soul is so exhausted, it stops projecting itself forward. Your inner voice, once a source of guidance, becomes a critic. It doesn't encourage, it interrogates. It doesn't nurture, it nags. It tells you you're falling behind, that you're not enough, that you're wasting time, that you should be further by now. But that voice isn't yours. It's borrowed from old expectations, from past comparisons, from a culture that measures people like machines. You mistake it for your conscience, but it's not guiding you. It's grinding you. And this is how the identity crisis deepens. You no longer trust your impulses. You second-guess your wants. You doubt your ability to change. You begin to shrink, not visibly, but spiritually. You stop asking big questions. You stop taking creative risks. You stop wondering what's possible. And the worst part is, you start adjusting to the dullness. You make peace with the numbness. You call it adulthood. You call it maturity. You call it realism. But deep down, something still aches. Not for more achievement, but for more aliveness. You think, maybe I'm just not that type of person anymore. Maybe I've changed. But no. You've dimmed. You've adapted to survive a system that demanded too much from you too fast for too long. You've armored yourself in apathy because it was safer than feeling the grief of everything you've lost along the way. You didn't choose this version of yourself. You inherited it from exhaustion, and now it wears your name. But identity isn't static, it's not a sentence, it's a mirror that can be cleaned. And you don't clean it by force. You clean it by slowing down enough to notice the smudges, by noticing how long you've been in survival mode, by asking yourself with brutal honesty, who was I before I got tired? What did I love before I had to be productive all the time? What mattered to me before I started performing every waking moment? The tragedy of burnout is that it convinces you the light has gone out for good, but it hasn't. It's been buried under noise, under guilt, under overcommitment and under connection. You've been so busy trying to be everything to everyone that you forgot how to be something for yourself. And now when there's finally space to ask what you want, you draw a blank, because it's been so long since anyone asked you that without expecting an answer that fits their plan. This is the identity crisis. When your outer life continues, but your inner self has gone silent. When you speak but feel disconnected from your own words. When you achieve but feel no pride. When you rest but feel no peace. That's not failure. That's the echo of a soul that needs attention, not judgment. There is still a version of you beneath all of this, not a perfect version, not a superhuman, just a clearer one that feels grounded, curious, open, one that doesn't run from slowness, one that doesn't need to prove anything just to feel enough. But to find that version, you have to stop identifying with your burnout. You have to stop calling it your personality. You have to see it for what it really is, a symptom of disconnection, not a definition of who you are. You are not your burnout. You are not your exhaustion. You are not this numbness. These are signals. They are asking for your attention, not so you can fix them like problems, but so you can hear them like messages. Messages from the self you buried under survival. And once you start listening, you'll remember. Not everything, but enough to begin again. Modern burnout is not just workload. It's emotional overstimulation. Burnout today isn't just caused by work. That's the surface. What's underneath is far more complex. You're not just tired because you've done too much. You're tired because your nervous system has been flooded day after day by 1,000 inputs it was never designed to process. Your exhaustion isn't just physical, it's emotional, cognitive, sensory. It's not just about tasks, it's about the weight of never being able to turn off. You wake up and check your phone before your feet touch the floor. In the first few minutes of your day, your mind is already comparing, reacting, absorbing the face of someone more successful, a tragedy you can't help, a message you haven't answered, a headline designed to trigger anxiety. Before you've even opened the curtains, you're already overstimulated. You haven't lived the day, and already your body believes it's under threat. You don't just carry your own life anymore, you carry everyone's highlight reels, everyone's opinions, everyone's problems. Constant exposure has become normal, but your biology hasn't caught up. You were made to track the moods of a small tribe, not thousands of digital strangers. You were made to process one conversation at a time, not notifications firing in bursts. You were made to sit in silence and think, not scroll endlessly in search of relief that never comes, and the overstimulation doesn't stop. Every app is a slot machine. Every feed is a flood. Every sound, vibration, color, and flashing image has been engineered to grab your attention, not to calm you, but to pull you deeper into reaction. It's no wonder your mind feels scattered. It's no wonder you can't focus. You're not broken. You're just overwhelmed by a world that profits from your distraction. Even rest becomes stimulation. You watch shows while texting, while snacking, while checking the clock. You can't sit still. You can't be with your own thoughts. Because stillness now feels unnatural. The moment silence arrives, your system panics. It's not just that you can't relax. It's that your body forgot how. You've been trained to stay alert, trained to expect input, trained to confuse rest with boredom. You might think your burnout is about work hours, deadlines, pressure to achieve, but look deeper. It's the constant access, the lack of boundaries, the absence of pause. It's never being unreachable, never being fully alone. It's feeling the need to reply instantly, to perform endlessly, to keep up constantly, even when no one's asking you to. Because now, the pressure isn't just external. It lives in your mind. Your brain is addicted to the surge, the dopamine hits from likes, messages, headlines, comments. But like all addictions, the reward fades, and all that remains is the craving. You don't feel pleasure, just relief from absence. You open your phone not to enjoy, but to avoid the discomfort of stillness. You refresh out of habit. You escape into stimulation not because you want to, but because you no longer know where else to go. And the price of this constant engagement is deep. You start losing your sense of self. When you're always consuming, always reacting, always adjusting, you forget how to originate. You forget how to create without comparing. You forget how to think without being influenced. You forget how to feel without the need to post it. And that forgetting is what empties you. Not all at once but in layers, until your inner life becomes a faint echo. Burnout today is digital, invisible, emotional. It's not just about doing too much. It's about feeling too much, thinking too much, being exposed to too much. You're not just tired from effort, you're tired from input, and no amount of productivity tools will fix a soul that's saturated. You don't need better time management, you need a return to quiet. This is why solitude feels so unfamiliar now. Why turning off your phone feels like cutting off a limb. Why you get anxious in silence. Because your system has been trained for chaos. It has been trained to expect more, faster, louder, and now stillness feels unsafe. Not because it is, but because you've forgotten how safe it can be. But you can remember, you can reclaim your attention, you can take back your breath, not all at once, but slowly, intentionally, by choosing to do nothing and not call it a waste, by giving your mind time to settle, to wander, to reset, by protecting your mental space like it's sacred, because it is. You are not just tired, you are overstimulated. And the cure is not more effort, but more emptiness. Not the emptiness of apathy, but the emptiness of spaciousness. The kind of space where your own voice can return, where your thoughts slow down enough to be understood, where your feelings aren't drowned by noise, but held with quiet respect. And in that quiet you will hear something ancient, something still alive beneath all the digital dust. You will hear yourself again. The false cure. Why rest isn't working. You've tried to rest, but you're still tired. You've taken days off, stepped away, unplugged. You've watched the shows, slept in, scrolled in silence, said no to plans, and yet the heaviness remains. The fog doesn't lift. You start to wonder if something's wrong with you, if maybe even rest can't fix you. But that's only because what you've called rest isn't actually rest. It's distraction in disguise. Numbing dressed up as recovery. There's a lie in modern life that rest equals stopping. That if you lie down, cancel plans, close the laptop, you're recharging. But real rest is not about stopping movement. It's about entering stillness. It's not about absence of effort. It's about presence of peace. And most of what we call rest today is simply our bodies collapsed, while our minds keep sprinting. You lie in bed but keep scrolling. You pause the world, but not your thoughts. You sit down, but you don't breathe. You remove the noise around you, but not the noise within you. And then when the tiredness doesn't leave, you blame yourself. You say, I rested, and I'm still exhausted. What's wrong with me? Nothing is wrong with you. You've just never been taught how to actually rest. Because real rest requires something you've been conditioned to avoid. Stillness without guilt. Quiet without purpose. Doing nothing, not as avoidance, but as a sacred act of repair. It's not passive, it's restorative. But in a culture that glorifies output, sitting in silence feels like failure. You think, I should be doing something. You feel pressure, even in peace, so your body lies down, but your nervous system never lets go. And that's where the loop traps you. You push yourself until you collapse. You call that collapse rest. You get up still tired. You think you didn't try hard enough. You push again, collapse again. And each time you repeat the cycle, you drift further from the kind of healing your soul is begging for. Not escape, but reconnection. Not withdrawal, but restoration. Not sleep, but reclamation. Because real rest is not just about pausing. It's about returning. Returning to the body, to the breath, to the moment, to your own internal rhythm that's been drowned out by urgency, productivity, and digital noise. True rest is spacious, not scheduled. It's felt, not performed. It comes in the form of deep exhale, of tears that finally fall, of memories that resurface when you stop distracting yourself long enough to feel again. And yes, this kind of rest is uncomfortable at first. Because the moment you slow down, everything you've been running from starts to rise. The ache you've been suppressing. The fears you haven't named. The decisions you've delayed. That's why so many people avoid true rest. Not because they don't want it, but because they're afraid of what they'll find in the silence. But the silence is not your enemy. It is your mirror. And if you can sit with it just long enough, it begins to shift. The tension in your jaw softens. Your breath deepens, your thoughts slow. The fog begins to part, and in that space, you find something you forgot you lost, your own presence. Not the version of you that's performing, achieving, reacting, but the version that simply is. Calm, awake, still. The world doesn't reward this kind of rest. It won't give you applause for slowing down. No one will hand you a trophy for learning how to be gentle with yourself. But your soul will thank you. Your body will thank you. Your future will thank you. Because the deeper you learn to rest, the stronger you return. And this return is not about bouncing back into the same patterns. It's about choosing differently, protecting your time like it's sacred, creating boundaries without apology, saying no without explanation, giving your nervous system what it actually needs, which is not more input, but less. Not more stimulation, but more space. You don't need to earn rest. You need to understand it. You need to reclaim it from the world that turned it into weakness. Because nothing is more powerful than a person who knows how to pause without collapsing. Who knows how to be still without being swallowed. Who knows how to be alone without being lonely. You're not broken because you still feel tired. You're just ready for a deeper kind of recovery. One that doesn't just touch your calendar, but your core. One that doesn't just clear your schedule, but clears your spirit. This is the rest that restores, that rebuilds. That brings you back to yourself. You keep asking why you feel this way, why you're tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, why your motivation has vanished, why even the things you once loved now feel distant. And buried beneath that question is a fear you've never said aloud. Maybe I'm just weak now. Maybe I've lost something I can't get back. But weakness isn't what's happening to you. What's happening is injury, not visible but real. And that injury isn't failure. It's a sign that your strength has been misused, not by laziness, but by overextension. In the ancient world, the Stoics understood this. They didn't confuse endurance with blindness. They knew that strength wasn't about pretending to be untouched. It was about knowing when to retreat inward, to heal in silence, to rebuild in solitude. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the world, sat alone at night and wrote not about glory but about holding himself together in the quiet chaos of his own mind. And you're in your own quiet chaos now. That doesn't make you broken. That makes you human. You've carried too much for too long without acknowledging the weight. You've dismissed your own needs, minimized your exhaustion, called your fatigue a phase, a lack of discipline, a mood. But no amount of hustle overrides the nervous system. No mindset hack erases the simple biological truth. You are a finite being, not a machine, not a brand, not an algorithm, a living system with thresholds. And once crossed, your body doesn't ask for permission to shut down. It simply begins the process. That process can feel like collapse, but it's not. It's correction. It's your soul pulling the brake on a runaway pattern, a pattern of always saying yes, of always producing, of always pretending. You mistake your pause for weakness because you've been living inside a culture that weaponizes pace. But stillness is not surrender. It's the ground on which clarity returns. This is the Stoic reframe. To look at your current state, the fog, the fatigue, the loss of motivation, not as evidence that you've failed, but as proof that you are still alive enough to respond. You could have ignored it. You could have gone numb. But you're here, seeking to understand, to feel again. That's not weakness. That's will. Quiet, determined, sacred will. Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." But you've been suffering in both, imagining you're broken, while enduring a pressure no one else sees. That dual burden is what deepens the wound, but it also means that the first step in healing is not doing something new. It's seeing something clearly. Seeing that what you've been calling failure is your body's last act of loyalty. It's been holding the line for you. Now, it's asking you to hold it back. You've been trained to bounce back quickly, to act like nothing happened, to return to normal. But normal is what brought you here. It's not where you belong anymore. You don't need to go back to who you were before the burnout. You need to become someone more rooted, more honest, more protective of your time, your attention, your energy. Not because you're fragile, but because you finally respect the cost of depletion. Strength isn't pushing through pain without pause. Strength is knowing when to stop before collapse. Strength is silence in a world of noise. Strength is saying no when the world rewards yes. Strength is in boundaries, in slowness, in choosing presence over performance. That kind of strength isn't obvious, it won't get applause. But it will save your mind. And when your mind is saved, everything else has a chance to begin again. So if you feel hollow right now, if you feel small, if you feel uncertain, understand this. You're not regressing. You're realigning. You're removing the parts of yourself that were performative. You're peeling off layers of forced positivity, fake drive, shallow endurance. What remains will be quieter but truer. And what's true is sustainable. You are not lazy. You are not weak. You are a human being who has absorbed too much for too long without permission to let it go. This isn't a flaw, it's a signal. One that says it's time to return to something older than ambition, your own center. And from that center, you don't have to race. You don't have to perform. You don't have to prove. You just have to remember what matters, what you value, what you can control, what you must let go. This is how Stoics endured, not by force, but by truth. And this truth is yours now. You were never lazy. You were just left behind by a world that forgot how to breathe. You were never lazy. You were simply left behind. Not because you couldn't keep up, but because what you were being asked to keep up with wasn't human. The speed, the noise, the constant urgency, the never-ending expectation that you should be reachable, productive, smiling, improving all at once. No one was meant to live like this. Not you, not anyone. And yet, here you are breathing through the wreckage of a pace that numbed your senses, dulled your joy, and convinced you that stillness was a sin. But stillness is not the enemy. It's the medicine you've been denied. It's the state your body was designed to return to, not as a reward after the burnout, but as a condition for clarity. Somewhere along the way, the world forgot that. It forgot how to breathe. And in trying to fit into that forgetting, you lost the rhythm that once made you feel alive. You've spent years being too hard on yourself, mistaking your exhaustion for failure, calling your disconnection weakness, measuring your days by what you produced instead of how deeply you lived. And every time your body asked you to slow down, you heard it as laziness. But it was never laziness, it was your nervous system saying enough. It was your spirit whispering, "This is not the way." And now, you're finally listening. You're not too sensitive, you're not too slow, you're not broken, you're awake. Awake to the cost of pretending, awake to the noise you used to drown in, awake to the parts of you that have been neglected in the name of ambition, or survival, or expectation. And in this wakefulness, something else is being born. Not a new version of you, but the real one. The one that doesn't need to chase every fire. The one that doesn't fear being misunderstood. The one that doesn't apologize for choosing peace. You don't need to be fixed. You need to be honored. The version of you that kept going when it was hard, that showed up through the numbness, that kept searching for something better, that version deserves reverence, not ridicule. You've survived a culture that gaslights rest and weaponizes guilt, and still you chose to stop. Still you chose to question. Still, you're here, trying to remember how to breathe again. And now you can, not in the way the world tells you, not through quick fixes or false rest or shallow self-care, but through something quieter, more sacred. You can breathe by removing what's not yours to carry, by letting go of the lies that say you must always be more, by unlearning the reflex to prove. You can breathe by coming home to your body, to your thoughts, to your time, not as a punishment but as a right. You're allowed to do less. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to exist without explaining. You don't need to deserve rest. You just need to stop betraying yourself to fit into a system that forgot how to pause. This isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The kind that comes not from force, but from finally feeling the truth beneath the noise. And the truth is this: you were never the problem. You were the one waking up inside a system designed to keep you asleep. You were the one hearing the whisper when everyone else turned up the volume. You were the one who decided to step back before your body broke down. That's not failure, that's inner power. The kind no one sees, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that builds the life you actually want, not the one you were told to chase. So breathe. Let the silence be a friend, not a threat. Let the pause be your protest. Let the slowness be your sanctuary. Let this moment be your return, not to who you were, but to who you are, beneath the burnout, beneath the pressure, beneath the performance. Because the world may have forgotten how to breathe, but you haven't. Not fully, you're remembering, word by word, breath by breath, choice by choice. And if this message met you in that moment between collapse and clarity, between guilt and grace, then let it stay with you. Let it mark the turning point. Not into another race, but into rhythm. Not into more tasks, but into stillness. Not into being better, but into being real. You're not alone in this. And if you want to keep walking this path back to yourself, subscribe, not for me, but to remind yourself that your healing is not a luxury. It's a return to truth.